Ambassador Kale sat at his floating desk, his four purple eyes scanning through endless digital files. The Galactic Council building hummed quietly around him, filled with the soft sounds of 1,000 different species working together. After 200 years of service, most days felt the same to him, but today was different. His young assistant, Vex, burst through the crystalline door without knocking. The thin, blue-skinned Alteran was shaking, his normally calm demeanor completely gone. "Sir, you need to see this," Vex whispered, his voice trembling. "I found something in the old archives. Something that should not exist." Kale looked up from his routine paperwork, annoyed at the interruption. "What could be so important that you forgot how to knock?" Vex activated his portable hologram projector with shaking fingers. A document appeared in the air between them, glowing with official Galactic Council seals. The text was written in the ancient script, but the translation was clear. Species classification: human, military status, prohibited from all warfare, beyond planetary defense. Authorization level: Ancient Council override. Date of enactment: 47,832 galactic cycles ago. Kale stared at the floating words. He read them again, then a third time. "This makes no sense," he muttered. "That's what I thought too," Vex said, still trembling. "But I checked the dating 3 times. This law was created almost 50,000 years ago. But humans only joined the Galactic Council 300 years ago," Kale said slowly. "They were discovered by our exploration ships near the Outer Rim. Captain Joel found them building their first space stations." "Exactly," Vex nodded rapidly. "How can there be a law about a species we had never met?" Kale stood up, his tall frame casting shadows across the office. He had worked with humans for decades. They seemed like one of the most peaceful species in the galaxy. Their current representative, a quiet man named Junho, rarely spoke during council meetings. When he did speak, it was usually to suggest compromises or peaceful solutions. "2 problems. Show me everything you found," Kale ordered. Vex pulled up more files. Each document made less sense than the last. There were references to something called the Terran campaigns, and mentions of human military units with names like Psychological Warfare Division and Deep Strike Forces. But according to every official record, humans had never fought in any galactic war. "Look at this authorization level." Vex pointed to the glowing symbols. Only the Ancient Council could create laws with this classification. But the Ancient Council disappeared 30,000 years ago. They ruled the galaxy before even my species achieved spaceflight. Kale felt a chill run down his spine. The Ancient Council was legendary. They had created most of the fundamental laws that still governed galactic civilization. But they had vanished mysteriously, leaving behind only their greatest achievements and darkest warnings. "Have you told anyone else about this?" Kale asked. "No, sir. The files were buried so deep in the archives that I only found them by accident. I was looking for trade regulations from the mining colonies." Kale began pacing around his office. His mind raced through possibilities. Could this be some kind of mistake? A filing error that had persisted for millennia? But the Ancient Council did not make mistakes. They were known for their careful, deliberate decisions. "Pull up the human psychological profiles," Kale said suddenly. Vex's fingers danced over his control pad. New documents appeared, showing detailed studies of human behavior and culture. Kale had read these reports many times before, but now he looked at them with new eyes. Humans were described as highly adaptable and excellent problem solvers. Their military forces were noted as surprisingly effective for their technological level. Several reports mentioned that human negotiators had an unusual ability to understand other species' motivations and fears. Here, Kale pointed to a line he had never paid attention to before. "It says human children play games that simulate complex military strategies for entertainment. And look at this. They study historical battles from their own planet with unusual intensity. What does that mean? Vex asked. I don't know, Kale admitted, but I'm starting to think we need to find out. He walked to his communication panel and entered a code he had not used in decades. The screen flickered to life, showing the symbol of the restricted archives files, so old and dangerous that only the highest-ranking council members could access them. Sir, are you sure about this? Vex asked nervously. Those archives are forbidden for good reason. Kale looked at the ancient law floating in his office, a law that prohibited a peaceful species from fighting wars. A law created by rulers who had seen the rise and fall of entire civilizations. A law that made no sense unless… Vex, he said quietly, what if we never discovered humans? What if they were hiding from us? The young assistant's blue skin turned even paler. But why would they hide? Kale entered his authorization codes into the restricted archive system. That's what we're going to find out, and I have a feeling we're not going to like the answer. The restricted archives were located deep beneath the Galactic Council building, in chambers that most beings had forgotten existed. Kale and Vex descended through ancient corridors lined with memory crystals that glowed faintly in the darkness. The security system recognizes your codes, Vex whispered, as massive doors slid open before them. But sir, these files haven't been accessed in over 20,000 years. Inside the archive chamber, rows of crystalline storage units stretched into the shadows. Each one contained the memories and records of civilizations long gone. Kale approached the terminal at the center of the room, his hands trembling slightly, as he entered the search parameters. Show me everything about humans from before official first contact, he commanded. The ancient system hummed to life. Lights flickered across the storage crystals as the computer searched through millennia of forgotten data. After several long minutes, a holographic display materialized in the air. Warning, the system announced, in a voice older than most species. The following records are classified under Ancient Council Protocol 7. Viewing requires psychological preparation protocols. Override the warnings, Kale said firmly. The first image that appeared made both of them step backward. It showed a massive space battle, but the ships were unlike anything in current galactic databases. The human vessels were smaller and seemingly weaker than their enemies, but they moved with a precision that seemed impossible. Battle Report 1247 of the Great Void War, a voice began. The recording was ancient, the speaker long dead. Terran Commander Minho achieved complete victory against the Devourer fleet. Enemy ships destroyed, 847. Terran losses, 0. Vex grabbed Kale's arm. Terran, that's the old name for Earth. The hologram shifted to show tactical displays. Kale watched in growing amazement as human forces surrounded enemy fleets 10 times their size, but they didn't win through superior firepower. Instead, they seemed to predict every enemy move before it happened. Personal log, Admiral Hyde. Another voice spoke. The humans continue to demonstrate abilities that our military theorists cannot explain. They don't just fight battles. They understand them completely. Yesterday, Captain Donghae convinced an entire enemy battle group to surrender by playing a simple pattern of lights on their communication screens. The recording showed a human ship flashing lights in what seemed like a random sequence. But, within minutes, the massive enemy fleet powered down their weapons and began broadcasting surrender signals. How did they know that would work? Vex asked, staring at the display. The next recording answered his question. Commander Suman has spent 3 weeks studying captured enemy communications, the voice explained. She discovered that the light pattern matched their species' ancient greeting ceremony. The enemy commanders couldn't bring themselves to fire on ships that were essentially saying hello in their grandmother's language. Kale felt his legs growing weak. He sat down heavily in one of the ancient chairs. They weren't just winning battles, they were winning without fighting. More recordings played automatically. Each one showed humans achieving impossible victories through methods that seemed like magic. They didn't destroy their enemies. They understood them so completely that resistance became pointless. "Hi, Admiral Taeyan. Final report," came a weary voice. "The war is ending, but not as we expected. The humans have convinced most of our enemies to simply stop fighting. They're not defeated, they're converted. Species that have been hostile for millennia are now asking to join our alliance." "But how?" Vex whispered. The hologram shifted to show a human woman standing before a group of captured enemy soldiers. She wasn't torturing them or threatening them. Instead, she was simply talking. The enemy soldiers were crying. Commander Naeon discovered that this enemy species communicates love and family bonds through mathematical sequences. The recording explained. She spent 2 days learning their family songs, then played them back, using our computer systems. The enemy soldiers realized that someone had taken the time to truly understand their culture. They couldn't continue fighting after that. The recordings continued, each one more incredible than the last. Humans ending wars by cooking traditional foods for enemy soldiers. Human negotiators who could make the fiercest warriors weep by reminding them of their children. Human tacticians who won battles by understanding their enemies' deepest fears and greatest hopes. But then the tone of the recordings changed. "Emergency session, Ancient Council," a grave voice announced. "The humans have requested a meeting. They wish to ... discuss their future in the galaxy." The final recording showed a group of human military leaders standing before the Ancient Council. Their faces were tired, and their eyes held a sadness that seemed too deep for such a young species. "We need to stop," said the human leader, a man identified as Commander Wonho. "The war has changed us. We see too much now. We understand every species so completely that we could control them all without them ever knowing." "What are you asking?" came the ancient counselor's voice. "Make us forget," Wonho said quietly. "Take away our memories of what we've learned. Send us somewhere far away where we can be innocent again. Because if we stay as we are, we won't be able to resist the temptation to fix everything, and that would be the end of free will in this galaxy." The recording ended in silence. Kale and Vex sat in the ancient chamber, staring at the empty holographic display. "They gave up godhood," Vex whispered finally. "They chose to become ordinary." Kale nodded slowly, understanding at last why the Ancient Council had created that impossible law. It wasn't meant to punish humans. It was meant to protect everyone else from what humans could become if they ever remembered what they truly were. The emergency alarm echoed through the Galactic Council chambers as representatives from hundreds of worlds gathered in urgent session. The holographic displays showed the same terrible images on every screen: burning space stations, destroyed trade ships, and refugee fleets fleeing from the Outer Rim territories. Kale sat in his observer chair, watching the chaos unfold. The Hegemony Alliance war had been brewing for months, but now it had exploded into full conflict. Both sides were using weapons that violated dozens of galactic treaties, and civilian casualties were mounting by the hour. "We need immediate intervention," shouted Chancellor Roth of the Free Worlds Alliance. His three-eyed face twisted with anger. "The Hegemony attacked our mining colonies without warning." "Your colonies were built on disputed territory," roared General Krex of the Hegemony, his massive form towering over the other delegates. "We warned you months ago to withdraw." The argument continued, as it had for hours. Neither side would back down, and neutral peacekeeping forces were either too small or too afraid to intervene. Kale found himself thinking about the ancient recordings he had discovered just days earlier. If those humans still existed, ... A quiet voice cut through the shouting. "The Terran Defense Force volunteers for peacekeeping duties." The entire chamber fell silent. Every eye turned toward the human section, where a young man stood calmly beside his chair. Kale recognized him as Ji-Ho, the new human representative who had replaced the gentle Jun-Ho only weeks ago. But something about Jiho was different from other humans Kale had met. There was a sharpness in his eyes, a way of standing that suggested he was constantly analyzing everything around him. When he smiled, it didn't quite reach his eyes. The ancient law prohibits human military engagement, Kale said carefully, remembering the recordings of what humans could do when they fought wars. Peacekeeping is not warfare, Jiho replied smoothly. We would simply monitor ceasefire zones and protect civilian evacuation routes. Completely defensive operations. Chancellor Roth looked desperate. We accept human assistance. General Krex nodded grudgingly, as do we, but only as neutral observers. Within hours, human ships were deploying to the war zone. Kale monitored their communications from his office, expecting to hear standard military chatter. Instead, what he heard made his blood run cold. Admiral Siajin to all units, came a calm voice over the comm channels. Initial analysis complete. The hegemony is using classic aggressive reconnaissance patterns. Fear-based tactics masking supply line insecurity. Alliance forces are in defensive cluster formation. Both sides are broadcasting their next 3 moves without realizing it. Kale's hands shook as he adjusted the frequency. The humans were analyzing the war like it was a puzzle to be solved, rather than a tragedy to be ended. Commander Yuna reporting, came a female voice. I've intercepted hegemony battle plans, standard doctrine, but with interesting psychological elements. Their commanders are trying to prove something to their home government. Classic overcompensation behavior. Acknowledged, Admiral Siajin replied. Commander Deho, what's your assessment of Alliance leadership? They're scared, came the answer. Running on emotions rather than strategy. Their formation shows they expect betrayal from within their own ranks. Probably political pressure from different member worlds. Kale realized he was listening to humans dissect the minds of entire military organizations. They weren't just studying battle tactics, they were understanding the fears, hopes, and motivations of every person involved in the conflict. Commander Minji, Admiral Siajin continued, begin preparation for psychological intervention protocols. We'll need to address the root causes, not just the symptoms. Already working on it, sir, came the reply. I've identified key emotional triggers for both sides. The hegemony responds to appeals to honor and strength. The Alliance responds to reminders of home and family. I estimate we can resolve this conflict within 18 hours, without firing a single shot. Kale felt sick. The ancient recordings had shown humans ending wars through understanding, but hearing it happen in real time was terrifying. They spoke about manipulating entire civilizations as casually as discussing the weather. The communication channel crackled again. Admiral, this is Captain Boyang aboard the Harmony. I've analyzed the cultural databases for both species. The hegemony's warrior caste has a deep emotional connection to lullabies from their childhood. The Alliance species shows strong nostalgic responses to certain food aromas. Shall I begin preparing emotional manipulation protocols? Affirmative, Admiral Siajin replied. But remember, we're helping them find peace, not controlling them. There's a difference. Kale wasn't sure there was a difference anymore. He watched his tactical displays as human ships moved through the war zone with impossible precision. They weren't avoiding battles, they were preventing battles from happening in the first place. All units, this is Admiral Siajin, came the final transmission. Kale heard that day. Phase 1, complete. Both sides have accepted our mediation. Casualty count remains at 0. Beginning deep psychological intervention in 30 minutes. Remember, we're not here to win a war. We're here to make sure nobody needs to fight one. As the communication ended, Kale stared at his screens in growing horror. The humans weren't just peacekeepers. They were something far more dangerous. A species that understood war so completely that they could end it before it truly began. And if they could do this to end wars, what could they do to start them? The war ended in 18 hours and 13 minutes. Kale stared at his tactical displays in complete disbelief. Two massive military forces that had been locked in deadly combat for months had suddenly stopped fighting. Not because they were defeated, but because they no longer wanted to fight. "How is this possible?" whispered Chancellor Roth, his three eyes wide with shock, as he watched his own fleet commanders requesting permission to invite human ships aboard for dinner. The first sign that something impossible was happening came from Captain Boyang of the human vessel Harmony. She had approached a hegemony battle group that was preparing to attack a civilian station. Instead of using weapons or shields, she had simply begun transmitting an audio signal on their emergency frequencies. Kale had recorded the transmission. It sounded like a simple melody, soft, gentle notes that seemed almost like a children's song. But within minutes of hearing it, the entire hegemony battle group had powered down their weapons and begun broadcasting messages of surrender. "We cannot fight," came the voice of the hegemony commander, and Kale could hear tears in his words. "That song, ... It reminds us of our mothers singing us to sleep when we were young." How did they know? How could aliens know the sacred lullabies of our home world? Captain Boyang's reply was gentle but terrifying in its implications. "We studied your cultural databases. We wanted to understand what would make you feel safe instead of afraid. But that was only the beginning, Commander." Hyunwoo, leading human ground forces, had ended a 3-month siege without firing a single shot. He had somehow gained access to the enemy's food distribution systems, not to poison them, but to ensure they received their species equivalent of comfort food for 3 straight days. The defending forces had become so overwhelmed with nostalgic feelings about home and family that they had stopped fighting and invited the humans in to share their meals. Within hours, enemies who had been trying to kill each other were sitting together, talking about their childhoods and showing pictures of their families. "This is not warfare," General Krex muttered, watching his own soldiers laying down their weapons to cook traditional recipes with their former enemies. "This is something else entirely." The most disturbing incident involved Commander Su Yang and her psychological operations team. They had been tasked with convincing a stubborn alliance commander to withdraw from a dangerous position, instead of threats or bribes. Su Yang had spent 2 days studying the commander's personal history. She had discovered that his father had died when he was young, leaving behind recorded messages for important moments in his son's life. Using advanced holographic technology, Su Yang had created a message that appeared to be from the commander's dead father, not to manipulate him directly, but to remind him of lessons about honor and wisdom that his father had actually taught him. The commander had watched the holographic message alone in his quarters. When he emerged 20 minutes later, he was crying and immediately ordered his forces to stand down. "How did you know what my father would have said?" he asked Su Yang over the communication channel. "We studied recordings of his voice, his writings, his friends' memories of him," she replied calmly. "We wanted to help you remember who you really are underneath all this anger and fear." Kale felt sick as he listened to these reports. The humans weren't defeating their enemies. They were healing them. They were reaching into the deepest parts of their minds and finding the things that made them human, or whatever their species equivalent was. But the most terrifying moment came when Admiral Seogen addressed both military forces directly. His message was broadcast simultaneously to every ship in the war zone. This conflict began because both sides felt misunderstood and threatened, he said, his voice calm and reasonable. "The hegemony needs to feel respected for their warrior traditions. The alliance needs to feel secure in their right to expand and grow. These are not opposing needs, they are complementary ones." Within his message, Seogen had somehow woven together references to both cultures' greatest heroes, their shared values, and their common fears. He spoke to hegemony warriors about honor, while simultaneously addressing alliance concerns about freedom. Most incredibly, he did it in a way that made both sides feel heard and valued. "He's not just talking to us," one Alliance captain reported. "He's talking to the part of us that remembers why we became soldiers in the first place. To protect people, not to hurt them." The final surrender came when the leaders of both sides realized that the humans had somehow arranged for them to receive personal messages from their own families. Not fake messages, but real communications from their loved ones back home. All saying the same thing, that they were proud of them for choosing peace over continued violence. Admiral Siojan's final report was delivered in the same calm tone someone might use to discuss the weather. "Peacekeeping operations successful. All hostile actions have ceased. Both sides have requested human mediation for permanent peace negotiations. Total casualties during human intervention, 0. As Kale watched the former enemies working together to arrange prisoner exchanges and humanitarian aid, he finally understood the true horror of human warfare. They didn't destroy their enemies or force them to surrender. They made their enemies want to be better than they were, and that was far more dangerous than any weapon ever created. The emergency session of the Galactic Council was the quietest Kale had ever witnessed. Representatives from hundreds of worlds sat in stunned silence, staring at the tactical displays that showed the impossible results of human intervention. A war that should have lasted years had ended in less than a day, with 0 casualties, and both sides now working together like old friends. Admiral Siojan stood at the center of the great chamber, flanked by his senior officers. Kale recognized them from the communication intercepts Commander Che-Yung, who had convinced an entire fleet to surrender by playing their childhood songs. Commander Ginwan, who had ended battles by sending soldiers messages from their families. And Lieutenant Yunji, who had somehow made enemy commanders remember why they had become soldiers in the first place. They looked so ordinary, just humans, in simple uniforms, standing calmly while the greatest powers in the galaxy stared at them with mixtures of awe and terror. "You lied to us," Chancellor Roth said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "For 300 years, you pretended to be just another peaceful species." Admiral Siojan nodded, without any sign of shame or regret. "Yes, we did." "The ancient records," Kale said, standing slowly. "We found them. Your people in the Great Void War. You were never discovered by our exploration ships. You were hiding from us." "Not hiding," Commander Che-Yung said gently. "Resting. Trying to forget what we had learned about ourselves during that war." General Krex, still shaken from watching his own forces abandon their weapons to share meals with their enemies, found his voice. "What are you? What kind of species can end wars by playing songs and cooking food?" Lieutenant Yunji stepped forward, her expression sad but patient. "We're the kind of species that understands other species completely. Every culture has patterns, ways of thinking, feeling, and behaving that make sense within their own context. We see those patterns clearly." "Too clearly," Admiral Siojan added quietly. "During the Void War, we learned that once you truly understand someone, their fears, their hopes, their deepest motivations, it becomes almost impossible not to help them become what they could be." The chamber remained silent as the implications sank in. Kale thought about what he had witnessed. Humans ending conflicts, not through force, but by making their enemies remember their better selves. "You could control us," Chancellor Roth said, "and it wasn't a question." "Without you ever knowing," Commander Jinwan confirmed. "We could make any species believe that our ideas were their own ideas. We could guide entire civilizations toward whatever future we thought was best for them. During the war, we started doing exactly that." "But you stopped," Kale said, remembering the ancient recordings of humans asking to have their memories erased. "We stopped because we realized what we were becoming," Admiral Siojan said. "Gods. Benevolent ones, perhaps, but still gods. And no species should have that kind of power over others, no matter how good their intentions." The silence stretched on as hundreds of representatives tried to process what they were hearing. These humans could have ruled the galaxy for millennia, shaping every species according to their vision of perfection. Instead, they had chosen to forget their own abilities and live as equals. "Why are you telling us this now?" asked Ambassador Thren of the Outer Colonies. "Why reveal yourselves?" Commander Chayung glanced at her admiral before answering. "Because our memories have been returning gradually over the centuries, and because the galaxy is facing challenges that may require our particular skills." "The Void Returners," Admiral Seogen said grimly. "Our deep space monitors have detected them moving toward inhabited systems. The same species that nearly destroyed all life 50,000 years ago. They're coming back." Kale felt his blood freeze. The Void Returners were legend, ancient destroyers that consumed entire star systems and left nothing behind but empty space. They had been driven away during the Great Void War, but only barely. "You're offering to protect us," General Krex said slowly. "We're offering to continue honoring the ancient law," Admiral Seogen corrected. "No human military engagement beyond planetary defense, but—" the word hung in the air like a knife. "But when the galaxy faces extinction," Commander Jinwan continued, "when all hope is lost and conventional forces cannot win, remember that there is a species that has never lost. A war. A people who understand conflict so completely that we can end it with a song, a meal, or a memory." Lieutenant Yunji's voice was gentle but firm. "We don't want to rule you. We don't want to guide your development or fix your problems. We want you to remain free to make your own choices, even when those choices lead to conflict and suffering. The law protects you from us," Admiral Seogen said, looking directly at Kale. "But it also protects us from ourselves. We've seen what we become when we embrace our full capabilities. We've chosen to be human instead of gods." As the human delegation prepared to leave, Admiral Seogen turned back to face the Council one final time. "But remember this, the choice will always be yours. When the darkness comes, when extinction threatens everything you hold dear, remember that there are humans who remember what we used to be, and will be waiting." The chamber doors closed behind them, leaving the representatives of 1,000 worlds to contemplate a terrible truth. They were protected by laws written by beings who had refused godhood to preserve the freedom of others, and someday they might need to ask those same beings to become gods again.